Burmese pythons have transformed the entire ecosystem of South Florida. After arriving here as seemingly innocent pets, these snakes have overrun their new environment in just a few decades.
For centuries, Florida's swamps and forests thrived in a perfect wild balance. Then, a silent invasion began, unraveling this ancient order. Animals vanished, and desperation grew. So, Florida made a move that shocked the world. They decided to fight snakes with snakes. The plan was ridiculed as a crazy last-ditch gamble. But this audacious experiment, mocked by millions, would soon become its greatest hope. A story of how bringing back a legendary predator began to rewrite the rules of survival itself.
South Florida has hired 25 top hunters to capture and kill the snakes. A nearly 17-foot-long python was killed last week.
When Florida's ecosystems collapsed under the silent invasion of giant pythons, experts proposed a solution so bizarre it was laughed into headlines: "Fight snakes with snakes." The world mocked the plan as a final act of desperation. But now, the results are in, and the laughter has died in everyone's throat. This is the stunning story of how releasing a rare native predator, the majestic eastern indigo snake, didn't just challenge an invader, it began to heal a broken world, turning a punchline into a profound global lesson. The Ghost Swamp. The Everglades in Florida was a place overflowing with life.
Predator becomes prey in the Florida Everglades.
The air was a constant chorus, the deep-throated croak of bullfrogs, the chattering of 1,000 insects, and the sharp cries of herons and egrets taking flight. At the water's edge, the muddy banks were scribbled with the tracks of busy raccoons and the shuffling prints of opossums. If you were quiet, you might spot a bobcat, a silent shadow in the sawgrass, or a family of rabbits nibbling on tender greens. This was a landscape in perfect buzzing balance, a complex dance of predators and prey that had carried on for centuries. But into this ancient balance, a silent invasion was creeping. It didn't arrive with an army or a declaration of war. It came in the form of a beautiful patterned snake, originally from the jungles of Southeast Asia, the Burmese python. For decades, these snakes were popular pets, imported by the thousands for their exotic looks.
To catch and kill as many Burmese pythons as possible.
But these are not creatures meant for living rooms. They grow a lot. Some can reach the length of a small car. Faced with a giant, powerful snake, some owners made a fateful and irresponsible choice. They let them go into the wild, thinking it was a kinder option. The Everglades, with its warm, wet climate, wasn't just a convenient dumping ground. For the Burmese python, it was a paradise. It was an all-you-can-eat buffet with perfect weather. And so, unseen and unchecked, they began to breed. A single female can lay up to 100 eggs at a time. Soon, what started as a few lost pets became a thriving population.
And the python population exploded in the 1990s.
Hidden deep in the marshes. For a while, no one noticed the change. It happened slowly, then all at once. The tracks on the riverbanks began to fade. The rustle in the undergrowth grew quieter. The scientists who had been studying the Everglades for years started to record something terrifying. The animals were vanishing. The numbers that started to come out were not just bad, they were almost unbelievable. In areas where the pythons had taken hold, studies showed that raccoons had all but disappeared, their populations plummeting by over 99%. Opossums, those tough scavenging survivors, were gone by 98.9%. Bobcats, foxes, marsh rabbits, they were virtually erased from the landscape. Imagine walking through a forest where 99 out of every 100 animals have simply vanished. The silence that replaced the once rich chorus of life was deafening. The swamp was becoming a ghost town.
For the many predators lurking in the marshland and swamps of the Florida Everglades.
This wasn't just about losing a few species. It was about the entire system falling apart. This is what scientists call a trophic cascade, when the disappearance of one piece causes the whole structure to crumble. Think of it like a game of Jenga. The mammals, the raccoons, rabbits, and opossums, were key blocks in the middle of the tower. When the pythons pulled them out, everything else began to wobble and fall. Animals that depended on those mammals for food started to starve. Foxes and bobcats, already struggling, found their pantries empty. Birds of prey had fewer meals for their young, but the collapse rippled out in other strange ways too. With far fewer rabbits and other plant eaters, the very plant life of the glades began to change.
The Everglades' native birds, rabbits, raccoons, and deer.
Some areas became overgrown. Even the fight against disease took a hit. With fewer predators like bobcats to control them, rodent populations could potentially surge, bringing their own problems. The heart of the Everglades was still beating, but it had grown weak and faint. The intricate web of life, woven over millennia, was being torn apart by a single, incredibly successful predator. The dance had stopped, and the music had died. The swamp was now a place of ghosts, and it seemed there was no way to bring life back. A desperate search for solutions. Faced with a ghost swamp, the response was one of determined panic. The crisis demanded action, and the first, most intuitive answer was a direct one: fight the invader head-on. The most famous of these early efforts became known as the Python Challenge. Think of it as a massive, state-sanctioned treasure hunt, where the treasure was a giant, invasive snake. It captured the world's attention.
Trains participants on humanely capturing and killing python.
Here were everyday citizens, seasoned hunters, and adventurers heading into the Everglades, hoping to wrestle a monster and win a cash prize. The South Florida Water Management District even offered $8.10 an hour to people willing to hunt the pythons. And these efforts worked, to a point. The hunts removed hundreds of pythons and generated crucial public awareness. But they also revealed the heart of the problem. The Everglades is a million-acre maze of water, mud, and thick brush. A python is a master of hide-and-seek, able to stay submerged for days and slide invisibly through dense grass. In a landscape that vast, finding them is like finding a needle in a haystack. One could walk right past a 20-foot python and never know it. Relying on human hunters alone was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. With sheer numbers proving insufficient, science stepped in. If the pythons could not all be found, perhaps they could be outsmarted.
The snakes are an invasive species that have wreaked havoc on the Everglades ecosystem.
Researchers began experimenting with ingenious, high-tech traps. Some efforts focused on using the python's own biology against them, deploying traps baited with synthetic versions of female python pheromones, the ultimate perfume to lure in lovesick males. Another clever tactic involved Judas snakes, where a captured python is fitted with a radio transmitter and released. This snake, seeking out others of its kind, would then lead researchers directly to a breeding cluster. Simultaneously, the state funded a small army of trained professional python hunters, experts who patrolled the glades day and night. These contractors became incredibly skilled, removing thousands of snakes, including massive egg-laying females. These methods were smarter and more effective than the public hunts. Every python removed was a victory. But they all shared the same fundamental limitation. They were reactive. It was a strategy of perpetual catch-up, chasing the invader through an impossible landscape. It became a relentless, exhausting game of whack-a-mole. For every snake caught, how many more were hiding, growing, and breeding? The approach treated the symptom, the python itself, but did little to heal the sick ecosystem that allowed the invader to thrive in the first place. The pythons had conquered because they faced no real competition. The natural checks and balances of the Everglades were broken. This frustrating stalemate led a handful of biologists and ecologists to ask a radically different question. What if the focus shifted only from the invader to the battlefield itself? Instead of pouring all available energy into removing pythons, what if the goal was to strengthen the ecosystem's own native defenses? What if the environment could be made more resistant to invasion? This represented a profound paradigm shift in conservation strategy. This is the concept known as rewilding. The idea is beautifully simple. A healthy, complete ecosystem is its own best defense. It is naturally resilient when all the pieces are in place: the plant eaters, the seed spreaders, the predators, the system can withstand shocks and fight off invaders.
Ecosystem responses adapt to better survive these changes.
The pythons won because they walked into a house that was already missing its locks and guards. The native apex predators that should have been policing the neighborhood were long gone. This line of thinking led to a stunning, and for many, a seemingly crazy conclusion. The missing piece, the native guard that could help restore order, was another snake. Not just any snake, but a legendary one that had itself been pushed to the brink of extinction by human activity. The solution to the snake problem, it turned out, was not fewer snakes. It was the right snake. This was not about fighting snakes with snakes. It was about healing a deep old wound inflicted on the land. It was about bringing back the king, the unlikely hero. So, what is this legendary creature? This supposed king of the forest? It's the eastern indigo snake. Forget everything you might fear about snakes for a moment and picture this animal.
Texas indigo, and that's the same reaction. A lot of people, because they are a very large snake, and she does look a little bit more aggressive.
It is a creature of sheer presence, the longest native snake in all of North America. A full-grown adult can stretch over 8 feet, moving with a smooth, muscular grace that speaks of power, not panic. Its scales are not merely black. They are a living jewel. In the sunlight, they shimmer with an iridescent blue-black sheen, as if polished from stone deep within the earth. This is a snake that commands respect simply by being. But its true power isn't in its beauty. It's in its lifestyle. The eastern indigo is a constrictor, but it is non-venomous. It doesn't rely on a toxic bite. Instead, it uses its formidable strength to overpower its meals. And what does a king eat? Almost anything it wants. Its diet is a testament to its role as a master regulator of the ecosystem. It hunts small mammals, frogs, and young birds. Most importantly, it is a dedicated predator of other snakes. This is where the indigo separates itself from every other creature in the forest. Imagine a rattlesnake, coiled and shaking its infamous tail as a warning. To most animals, that sound means danger. To an eastern indigo snake, it's a dinner bell. The indigo is immune to the venom of North America's native pit vipers, including rattlesnakes and copperheads. It feels no fear. It will approach that rattlesnake, engage in a powerful struggle, and eventually swallow its venomous cousin whole. The same goes for a coral snake, with its brightly colored rings signaling poison to the world. The indigo sees only food.
Coral snakes have a very unique defensive system. The defensive system that these snakes use is bright coloration.
Where this snake lives, populations of venomous snakes are naturally kept in check. It is the peacekeeper, the top sheriff, who maintains order. This snake was once the widespread guardian of the American Southeast, its domain stretching from the sandy ridges of South Carolina down through the heart of Florida. But then, this guardian nearly vanished. The story of its decline is a slow, sad story of human progress closing in. The indigo snake is inextricably linked to one of the world's most endangered ecosystems, the longleaf pine forest. These were not dense, dark woods, but vast, sun-dappled savannas, with tall, elegant pines spaced widely over a carpet of grass. It was a perfect world for the indigo, offering open hunting grounds and the deep underground burrows of the gopher tortoise for shelter. That perfect world was systematically taken apart. Nearly 97% of the longleaf pine forests were cleared for timber, agriculture, and development. The great connected wilderness was shattered into tiny, isolated islands. For a snake that needs to roam vast territories, this was a death sentence. Roads then cut through these remaining fragments, creating deadly barriers. Countless indigos were killed trying to cross these new asphalt highways. The final blows came from direct human conflict. The indigo's magnificent size and gentle disposition made it a prime target for the illegal pet trade. Collectors would pluck thousands from the wild.
Over the years, they've been killed or driven out as homes and roads were built,
stripping the forests of their breeding adults. And in a cruel twist of fate, widespread rattlesnake roundups, Events meant to kill venomous snakes often slaughtered the harmless indigo right alongside them, destroying the very animal that naturally controlled the rattlesnake populations. By 1978, the silence in the forests was deafening. The eastern indigo snake was officially listed as a threatened species, the first snake in the United States to receive such a designation. The king had been dethroned, not by a rival, but by the slow, relentless squeeze of human expansion. The forests grew quieter, not just without the indigo, but because, without its steadying influence, the entire balance of nature had begun to tilt toward chaos. The genesis of a gamble. While the public was just becoming aware of the python crisis, a dedicated group of conservationists was already working on a quiet, decades-long project. Their focus was not on the invader, but on a native son. At the heart of this effort was the Orion Center for Indigo Conservation, working in close partnership with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. These were not people who made rash decisions. For years, they had been painstakingly studying every aspect of the eastern indigo snake, its genetics, its diet, its preferred habitat. They developed a successful breeding program, learning how to raise healthy young snakes in captivity. This wasn't a sudden idea. It was a carefully laid plan, years in the making, waiting for the right moment and enough scientific support to become a reality. When that plan was finally unveiled, the official announcement was met with a roar, not of applause, but of laughter. Headlines everywhere screamed variations of the same joke. Florida to fight snakes with snakes. Talk show hosts and late-night comedians had a field day. On social media, the story went viral, fueled by memes poking fun at a state government seemingly lost in a reptile nightmare. The public imagination painted a picture of bureaucratic madness, a hopelessly circular logic that only Florida could dream up. The plan was dismissed as a last, desperate act, a punchline rather than a policy. But beneath the layers of mockery was a solid three-part scientific rationale that made perfect sense to ecologists. First, with the raccoons and foxes gone, populations of native rats and other rodents were thriving. More importantly, without the indigo snake, venomous snakes like rattlesnakes and cottonmouths faced one less major predator. Their numbers were swelling. Reintroducing the indigo was a direct way to re-establish this natural control, putting a proven predator of venomous snakes back on the beat. Second, the indigo snake is a generalist hunter. While it specializes in eating other snakes, it also consumes a significant number of small mammals and amphibians.
Specifically, they eat venomous snakes, so copperheads, rattlesnakes.
By preying on rodents, it would help fill the ecological role left vacant by the missing mammals, providing a secondary check on those populations and helping to restore a missing link in the food web. And third, there was the python connection, the part everyone latched onto, but for the wrong reasons. The primary goal was never to unleash indigo snakes as dedicated python hunters. An adult Burmese python is far too large for an indigo to tackle. However, nature is opportunistic. A young hatchling python, just a few feet long, is a vulnerable creature, and a large eastern indigo snake is a formidable and opportunistic predator. The scientific reasoning was that if an indigo encountered a young python while foraging, it would likely see it as a potential meal. It was a beneficial side effect. The gamble, then, was not a reckless stunt. It was a calculated move to restore a keystone species, betting that its return would trigger a cascade of stability throughout the damaged ecosystem. The world heard a joke, but scientists were whispering a prayer. The release. Turning a bold idea into reality required a process as careful and deliberate as the plan itself. This wasn't about simply opening cages at the edge of a swamp. It was a multi-year mission, blending science, patience, and a deep understanding of the indigo snake's needs. The first critical step took place far from the wild, inside specialized facilities like the Orion Center for Indigo Conservation. Here, The next generation of indigo snakes began their lives in safety.
If you're going to save wild animals, you have to save wild places.
Eggs laid by breeding adults would hatch into tiny, vibrant copies of their parents. But these hatchlings were not immediately released. Instead, they entered a program known as head starting. Think of head starting like giving a child a great head start in life with a great education and plenty of healthy food. For 1 to 2 years, the young indigo snakes lived in protected enclosures, safe from predators, disease, and hunger. They were fed regularly, growing strong and reaching a formidable size of about 4 to 5 feet long. Releasing a small, vulnerable hatchling into the wild would be a death sentence. Releasing a robust, confident, near-adult snake dramatically increased its odds of survival. This period of care was the crucial foundation for everything that followed. But where does one release a king? You don't just drop it anywhere. The choice of location was a science in itself. Biologists needed places that offered a fighting chance, secure, protected, and resembling the snake's lost kingdom. Sites like the Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve in Florida became the chosen sanctuaries. These were not random patches of woods. They were carefully restored landscapes where conservation groups had worked for years to bring back the iconic longleaf pine forests, the ancient homeland of the indigo. Even more importantly, these preserves held a living key to the snake's survival: healthy populations of gopher tortoises. A gopher tortoise burrow is more than just a home for its builder. It is an underground apartment complex for hundreds of species. For the eastern indigo snake, these deep, temperature-stable burrows are non-negotiable. They provide essential shelter from fire, cold, and predators. A landscape with gopher tortoises is a landscape ready to welcome indigo snakes home. Then came the day of the release. After years of planning and waiting, the moment was filled with a quiet tension. Biologists carried cool, dark bags into the sun-dappled forest. Each bag held a single, head-started indigo snake. The air was still. With gentle, practiced hands, a biologist would open a bag and lay it on the ground at the entrance of a tortoise burrow. For a long second, nothing would happen. Then, a sleek, blue-black head would emerge, tasting the air of its ancestral home for the very first time. The snake would slide out, its iridescent scales catching the light. There was no frantic dash for freedom, just a slow, powerful, and deliberate exploration.
Look at this snake and you can see it is just unique the way it's able to move, incredibly strong, long body.
It would often pause at the mouth of a burrow, as if recognizing its new front door, before disappearing into the cool, dark earth. It was a moment of profound hope, the sight of a lost guardian returning to its post. But the work was far from over. Each released snake was fitted with a tiny, harmless radio transmitter, carefully attached to its body. This allowed biologists to track their movements weekly. These signals became a lifeline of data, revealing whether the snakes were settling in, finding food, and surviving the challenges of the wild. A system healing. For the first few years, success was measured in quiet, electronic beeps. Biologists tracking the released indigo snakes held their breath, hoping the signals would continue. And they did. The data streaming from the radio transmitters told an encouraging story. The snakes were not just surviving, they were thriving. They established stable home ranges, explored the landscape, and found shelter in the gopher tortoise burrows. This was the first crucial milestone. It proved that the head starting program worked and that these carefully raised snakes could successfully transition to life in the wild. The logistics of the reintroduction were a success, but a population sustained by releases is like a garden that needs constant replanting. The true dream was for the garden to seed itself. That dream came true in 2023.
Released into the wild in North Florida to eat other invasive snakes.
The ones that were deep in a North Florida preserve, a biologist made a find that sent a wave of pure exhilaration through the conservation community. 2 tiny, perfect eastern indigo hatchlings. These were not snakes from a conservation center. They had never been fed by human hands or lived in a protected enclosure. They were the wild-born offspring of snakes that had been released years earlier. This was the ultimate confirmation, the moment the gamble was proven right. The indigo snakes were not just living in the forest. They were calling it home, building families, and securing their own future. This discovery in Florida echoed a similar triumph in Alabama, where the first wild-born indigo in decades was found in 1929. The king was not just a visitor. His dynasty was beginning anew. The return of the indigo snake began to send quiet ripples of recovery throughout the ecosystem. While long-term studies are ongoing, the early signs are powerfully promising. In areas where the indigos have been re-established, landowners and biologists have reported noticeable changes. The populations of venomous snakes, once booming without their top predator, began to moderate. Farmers noted fewer encounters with rattlesnakes near their homes and outbuildings. This wasn't eradication. That was never the goal, but a return to a more natural and manageable balance. And what of the infamous python? While an adult indigo is no match for a giant Burmese python, the invader is most vulnerable at the start of its life. A hatchling python is a meal-sized snake for a large indigo. The indigo snake becomes one vital part of an integrated pest management strategy, a natural soldier in a very long war. The most profound success, however, extends far beyond snake-eat-snake drama. The story of the indigo's return is inseparable from the story of the longleaf pine ecosystem itself. To save the snake, conservationists had to save its world. This meant restoring thousands of acres of longleaf pine forest, protecting the gopher tortoise, and managing the land with prescribed fires to maintain the open, sunny conditions these species need. The indigo snake is now a living symbol of this broader victory. Its shimmering presence in the underbrush is a sign that the land itself is healing, that the ancient, complex web of life is slowly mending. The return of one king helped crown the restoration of an entire kingdom, a blueprint for the world.
So a rare snake has slithered its way back home. We're talking about the eastern indigo. It's only been spotted in Alabama.
The journey of the eastern indigo snake is a story of stunning reversal. An idea that was once a national punchline, fighting snakes with snakes, has quietly transformed into an international model for conservation. The very plan that sparked jokes and head-shaking is now a blueprint for hope, a proven case study in how to heal a damaged world. The laughter that once echoed through newsrooms and social media feeds has faded, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of a gamble that paid off in the most profound way possible. This is the story of mockery turning into method, and desperation evolving into a durable strategy for the future. So, what is the deeper, universal lesson here? It's the power and promise of a concept called rewilding. Rewilding is not about micromanaging nature, forever hunting a single problem species, or building endless fences. Instead, it's a philosophy that asks us to restore the heart and soul of an ecosystem. The central idea is beautiful in its simplicity. A healthy, complete system has the built-in strength and intelligence to look after itself. The indigo snake story teaches us 3 vital rules of this approach. First, identify the keystone species, the one whose presence, like a keystone in an arch, holds the entire structure together. Without it, the system is weak and unstable. Second, take a holistic view. Understand that to save one species, you must save the entire community it belongs to, from the towering pine trees down to the tortoise burrows deep in the sand. And third, trust natural processes over constant, exhausting human intervention. The goal is not to become permanent gardeners of the wild, but to restore the balance so that the wild can manage itself, as it did for millennia before we disrupted it. This story is not unique to Florida. It echoes in successful conservation efforts around the globe. In Yellowstone National Park, The reintroduction of wolves, another keystone predator, did not just control elk populations. It triggered a cascade of life that changed the very geography of the park. With fewer elk overgrazing them, willow and aspen trees returned along the riverbanks. Their roots stabilized the soil, which changed the flow of the rivers themselves. In the United Kingdom, bringing back beavers has naturally reduced flooding and created new wetlands that host an explosion of biodiversity, from insects to fish to birds. The indigo snake now takes its place among these landmark successes. It stands as a seminal example for the modern era, where invasive species and fractured ecosystems are defining challenges. It proves that sometimes the most sophisticated and sustainable solution is not a new chemical or a new machine, but an old, forgotten relationship, restored. The work in Florida, of course, is far from over. What began as a desperate gamble has matured into a long-term, visionary plan. The ambition now is grander. The mission is to continue releasing indigo snakes, not just in a few protected pockets, but across a connected network of restored lands. Conservationists are actively working to create and secure habitat corridors, lifelines of green that allow wildlife like the indigo to travel, find new mates, and genetically mix, ensuring robust and healthy populations for centuries to come. This isn't just about snakes. It's about stitching a fractured landscape back together. The long-term goal is a resilient and self-regulating Florida, where ancient rhythms once again dictate the pulse of life.